What use can you get out of utility-grade beef? Do you always need to pay for Prime, or can you save on Select? Here's what to know about those beef badges you see at your local grocery store.
Where's the beef?
So what goes into grading meat and why do we do it? The US Department of Agriculture has a ranking system that may sound familiar. If you've seen meat described as prime on a restaurant menu, you've experienced graded meat before, but the system goes way beyond just one grade. There are actually 8 in total that range from the gourmet prime all the way to the lowly canner. These rankings were first developed in the 1920s and created a systemized approach to beef that made it easy for farmers to produce and consumers to purchase. The process is carried out by USDA-appointed graders who rank the meat individually with different methods and tools at hand. This grading system has been revolutionary for the meat industry and allows consumers to know exactly what they're buying. Beyond this, there are plenty of things that may surprise you about how and why beef is ranked the way it is, and what this means for our beloved steaks. In the world of meat, Prime, Choice, and Select are the most prized grades on the US market. These steak grades are usually found in restaurants, butcher shops, or grocery stores. However, there are others which might not be as illustrious: Standard, Commercial, Cutter, Utility, and Canner. What separates each steak grade? The answer is a bit complicated, but according to the USDA, age, marbling, and muscle are the most important factors. This means that a lot goes into measuring what makes a good slab of beef. The better the marbling, the higher it ranks in the grading system. Prime beef will be the youngest and most marbled cut of meat with good structure from healthy muscles. Once you get into canner territory, you may be asking some questions.
I can't tell you how full I am with salted meat. I'd eat 2 more cans if I could. I'm sure I'd be sick. There's a lot of beef in my stomach.
While there are several grades of meat, there are also 2 major categories to differentiate types of beef: quality and yield. The names can lend valuable insight into the type of steak you're buying. Daryl Tatum with the Colorado State University Department of Animal Science wrote a comprehensive field guide to appreciating the 2 different grading systems. Quality, Tatum noted, should really be understood as the expected quality of the piece of meat. He observed that tenderness, flavor, and juiciness are the major factors for each grade of beef, and physical factors like the amount of marbling in the cut as well as its age will guide graders to determine the cuts clearly. Beef can only be ranked as prime beef when it's 9 to 30 months old and has the highest amount of marbling possible. Yield, on the other hand, focuses on just how easy it is to butcher the overall cow carcass. The more muscle a piece of beef has, the tougher and chewier it will be, while more fat will result in a softer cut. Simply put, Yield 1 is the highest grade and Yield 5 is the lowest. This particular subcategory doesn't often come into play with everyday consumers, however. It's truly for the meat elite. For those who prefer to have lots of marbling in their steak, make sure to keep in mind just what this marbling is and what it should look like. Marbling doesn't mean outer or intermuscular fat. Instead, marbling is going to be the fat that's intramuscular, or in between the cut's muscles. This fat will contrast boldly with what should be the steak's deep red flesh, and will be noticeable, purely white flecks of fat. It should never be yellowed or graying. The overall steak should be firm yet tender.
These should be prime, and this isn't the marbling for prime.
Bobby, what are you doing? Don't insult a man's steak without tasting it. You'll get us killed.
Marbling needs to melt in order to positively impact the steak cut. Usually, any cooking technique under 130 degrees won't allow the marbling to melt and enrich the beef's flavor. So serving up heavily marbled steak extra rare is a waste of good marbling. Instead, steak masters should opt for a leaner cut when going almost raw. There is a reason why prime beef is so well known. It's the choicest of cuts. This particular beef grade is often regarded as the most palatable, tender, and flavorful, and it takes a lot to be recognized as prime. The beef needs to be sourced from young cattle that are under 30 months old. Prime is also going to be the fattiest of beef grades. This fattiness, while it may not sound appealing to some, is just what gives this particular grade its outstanding texture and flavor. For some luxury diners, there's simply no other choice than to go all out. Even in trying times, some gourmands still try to make room for pleasure, and in 2022, despite inflation, prime beef was trending upward in sales according to Beef Magazine. This is pretty astonishing given that the beef grade's prices have skyrocketed in the years surrounding the pandemic, peaking at 46% higher in early 2022 when compared with 2020 prices. Given that it takes a lot to qualify as prime beef, it's no surprise that it's not as abundant as other cuts. Prime beef makes up only around 3.5% of all beef that was graded in 2021, according to Beef Magazine. While that's 3 times higher than it was in 2014, it's still comparatively rare. So when looking at prime on the menu, don't be shocked to see higher prices. It's a luxury treat among meats. Those who still love to indulge on this pricey piece of cow may be surprised about where to buy it. Grocery stores, even high-end ones, tend to not keep a lot of prime beef in stock, since some grocers have limited storage space to work with and may not expect to sell much gourmet foods. If you can't find prime beef locally, online retailers specialize in beef, and they can bring a piece of prime beef right to your door. With all the hype surrounding prime beef, one might be surprised to learn that choice cuts can be just as good a selection. Choice grade beef is going to be just as young as prime, but what really differentiates the two is marbling. Choice is the slightly leaner option, but as Serious Eats notes, in reality, it may not be as cut and dry as the rankings imply. Not all beef specialists agree that marbling is indicative of the best cut of meat. But just because choice beef may have less fat than prime, that may not mean it's any worse off. It's also noted that choice beef tends to have less marbling because it's sourced from grass-fed beef, which some argue tastes better than the grain-fed prime beef grade cuts. Because more beef is being qualified as prime now due to changing grading standards, some believe that the quality of prime is beginning to drop anyhow. Grocery stores are more likely these days to have prime that barely qualifies in the category, but at the same higher price. Choice grade may be the best way to make a steak after all, at a fraction of the cost. Select beef tends to be written off when it's sitting next to prime and choice options at the meat counter, but in the right circumstances, select grade beef can really be the best solution. While just as young as prime and choice, select has the least amount of marbling. Tatum ranked this grade of beef as lean, having very minimal marbling, although not tough to chew. Select didn't always have an easy time though. Until 1988, it was known as good beef. Fearing that consumers wouldn't appreciate the meat as much, the USDA opted to revamp the grade as select to keep up with fancy terms like choice and prime. While it may not be the most tender of cuts, select beef can still result in a tasty steak with the right methods. For example, the USDA recommends that due to its considerably lower fat level, it will taste best with a marinade and braising. Below prime, choice, and select comes standard, the last of the 4 widely sold retail beef varieties. Standard is truly the tipping point in tenderness. It's the same age as the other 3 high-quality steaks, however, it contains virtually no marbling. Due to this lack of fat, select grade beef is when young beef becomes tough. The USDA implies that there really isn't anything that will make this grade of meat steak-worthy. Its texture tends to not cook well on its own, without the addition of sauces and modifications. This beef grade is usually sold as store-brand beef. Commercial grade, as the name implies, is still fit for sale. It's older beef, and as defined by the USDA, sourced from cows that are at least 42 months of age, which makes them a completely different grade of beef. Although this grade of beef is older, it does have a moderate amount of marbling. This means that the beef has a slightly fatty texture that can still lend itself to cooking, although age will significantly detract from the beef's overall flavor. Needless to say, this isn't the beef that will give you the most high-end steak experience. Rather, it's for those who are willing to experiment with a lower-quality, cheaper option. Utility, cutter, and canner beef, as each name implies, are not usually butchered for home or culinary use. The 3 lower grades are, according to Tatum, cut from mature cows like commercial. In contrast to commercial, however, the 3 grades have even less marbling. Cutter is described as basically having no intramuscular fat, which may be where its intense name came from. Both utility and cutter are not really made for a high-end dining experience, though, as Jonathan Campbell, An extension meat specialist explained to the takeout, "You may still find them as a cheap part of a buffet." Many agree that the best cooking tip for these USDA grades is simply to steer clear of them whenever possible. But just because this quality of beef isn't regularly sold doesn't mean you haven't eaten them, though perhaps unknowingly in processed foods like hot dogs, which often use low-grade beef to make their fillings. In that sense, what one might write off as incredibly low-quality meat may just be an American staple. Notably, human consumption isn't the only use for these beef grades. Dog food will often use these low-quality beef grades as filling. It's not for everyone.
If I wanted to make boring small talk over low-grade beef, I'd have dinner at home.
Beef has long been a part of American cuisine, and a large beef industry is necessary to maintain this. At the turn of the century, Chicago wasn't just one of the major beef-producing cities, it was the capital of beef production. There were many accounts that the working conditions in the city's beef manufacturing plants were both inhumane for the cattle and humans that worked in them. The now renowned journalist Upton Sinclair, who was only 26 at the time, worked undercover at one of the city's largest meat packaging plants. The conditions horrified him so much that he wrote The Jungle. While the book now rests as a piece of American history, at the beginning of the 20th century, it was so controversial that Sinclair had to pitch it to numerous publishers before getting the book in stores. The Jungle quickly had a significant impact and went on to inspire multiple health and safety laws in the food industry by the 1910s. The USDA acknowledges that Sinclair paved the way for major food safety reform that has directly impacted how safe American food is today. The USDA beef grading system has now been in effect for over a century. While widely used and accepted, it doesn't mean that some retailers haven't tried to pull a fast one. As reported by the Washington Post in 2014, the supermarket chain Giant opted to label all of its beef USDA graded. This was confusing for customers as the label failed to specify which grade the beef actually was. The ambiguous labeling was a marketing trick to try to encourage shoppers to buy any type of beef without any prejudices against its USDA grade. The Post also pointed out that this tactic was a cost-saving maneuver to avoid using multiple labels. Food safety specialists, as well as officials at the USDA, voiced dissent that such practices are not only a food safety concern, but show a lack of transparency on the side of the grocer.